Welcome to a world where November holds secrets too dark to be spoken. In one quiet town, the shadows of the Wilson house cling to memories of the vanished family and the curse of an ancient spirit. Elsewhere, in a hidden cabin, a mysterious figure lingers, waiting each November to claim any soul brave or foolish enough to cross its path. And in Ashmore, townspeople know that on November 11th, at precisely 11:11 p.m., they must hide, for a silent, chilling presence is coming. Each story pulls you deeper into the mysteries and whispers that haunt these towns. Are you ready to face the shadows of November? Watch on, but don't look away. The eternal shadow of November. November in the small town of Millwood always began with a thick fog and an icy chill that seeped into every corner. Lisa Thompson, a well-known author of horror and mystery novels, had just moved to the town in search of inspiration for her latest work. She heard whispers about the abandoned Wilson house, where the family was said to still haunt its walls since that November night in 1997, when the entire family mysteriously vanished without a trace. Despite warnings from locals, Lisa felt an inexplicable pull toward the house. She believed it might hold the inspiration she sought for her new novel. But strange things started happening from the very first day she arrived. Every night at exactly 11 p.m., a strange, icy wind would slip through her window, even though it was securely shut. Occasionally, she would hear footsteps in the hallway or faint whispers from the darkness, as though someone was calling her name from far away. Unable to resist her curiosity, Lisa decided to enter the Wilson house on a chilly November evening. The house was blanketed in darkness, an eerie silence pressing in from all sides. She held a flashlight as she moved through each room, taking notes in her journal. In Emily's room, she noticed a small bed with an old, dusty doll lying atop it. Its empty eyes stared back at her, as if following her every movement. Suddenly, a chill swept through the room, and Lisa heard a child's voice whisper in her ear, "Will you play with me?" Lisa spun around, startled, but saw no one. She tried to convince herself it was just her imagination. Yet, as she left Emily's room, she could sense something following her, a slight movement always just outside her line of sight. Occasionally, she thought she saw the shadow of a small child lurking in the corners, but every time she looked back, no one was there. After leaving the Wilson house, Lisa began to experience strange nightmares every night. In her dreams, she would become Emily, fleeing from a massive shadow that pursued her. The shadow was featureless, only a dark, looming presence with blazing eyes that burned into her, terrifying her into silence. The young Emily in the dream tried to scream, but no sound escaped her throat. Lisa would wake in a cold sweat, and every morning after these dreams, she'd find tiny handprints on the mirror in her bathroom, as if someone had reached out to her from the other side. Unable to bear it any longer, Lisa began to research the Wilson family. She discovered that Emily didn't just have an imaginary friend. The little girl truly believed she was haunted by an ancient spirit. According to records Lisa found in the local library, a gruesome event had occurred in the 19th century on the very site of the Wilson house. A woman named Eleanor had been accused of witchcraft and brutally executed by the townspeople. Before she died, Eleanor cursed the entire town, vowing to return every November to harvest the soul of anyone who dared to occupy her land. The Wilson family seemed to be the curse's latest victims, and Lisa realized she was now dangerously close to touching a darkness beyond her understanding. Haunted by visions and strange events, Lisa decided to return to the Wilson house on the night of November 30th, the peak of all supernatural happenings. She armed herself with a video camera, a voice recorder, and a talisman gifted to her by the innkeeper, who warned her to hold on to it if she felt threatened and never to look away from it. As she entered, it felt like the house had been waiting for her. The door slammed shut behind her, and the darkness seemed to engulf her completely. Her flashlight's beam grew faint, as if swallowed by the shadows. The whispers grew louder, sinister, filling the empty space around her. "Welcome home, Lisa," the voice whispered, no longer that of a child, but a deep, malevolent tone laced with malice. She steadied her breath, attempting to turn on her camera and recorder, but they refused to work. Everything in the house seemed under the control of the darkness, twisting reality to trap her inside. She heard Emily's laugh echoing down the hall, an eerie, chilling sound that lingered in the air. Lisa realized that to escape, she would have to free Emily's spirit and lift the curse. Following cryptic clues Emily had left behind, Lisa discovered a hidden room behind the living room wall. Inside was an ancient mirror with a blood-red inscription, "Free me or stay here forever." As Lisa read the words, she heard a piercing scream. She turned to see the shadowy form of Eleanor approaching, her blazing eyes filled with fury. Lisa recited a final incantation from an old book on exorcism, clutching the glowing talisman in her hand. A blinding light burst from the charm, forcing the shadow to retreat toward the mirror. Eleanor let out a blood-curdling scream as her form began to dissolve, pulling with her the trapped spirits of her victims, including Emily. As the light faded, Lisa found herself standing alone in the now desolate room. The house had fallen silent, the malevolent force seemingly banished. But as she turned to leave, she heard a final whisper from the depths of the darkness. "I will return. Next November." Lisa left the town, carrying the story and the haunting memory of the Wilson house with her. She knew the shadow had been pushed back, but the curse had never truly been broken. Every November it would wait, hungry for another soul daring enough to enter Eleanor's domain. The November Visitor. In a secluded town nestled in the dense woods of Vermont, locals shared a chilling story that no one dared test. Every November, a mysterious figure would appear near an old cabin in the woods, seeking out a visitor to take back with him to the shadowy unknown. This legend had become something of a dark fairy tale, told around bonfires and whispered in hushed tones as the leaves turned red and the air turned crisp. But those who had lived in the town long enough believed it wasn't just a story. Too many people had gone missing each November, and each disappearance was eerily similar. No trace, no explanation, just gone. Sam Walker, an outsider and an adventurous photographer, was drawn to this story after hearing it from a fellow traveler. November was approaching, and Sam's curiosity grew as he imagined the potential for a powerful, eerie photo shoot. Dismissing the warnings, he rented the infamous cabin in the woods, thinking the fear was all part of the local color, an elaborate story to scare away city folk. November 5th brought Sam to the doorstep of the cabin. It was old, its wood damp with decades of unbroken solitude, and the windows peered out into the surrounding forest like hollow, watching eyes. As he unpacked his equipment, he noticed strange carvings in the doorframe, crude etchings of eyes all staring outward. It was unsettling, but he brushed it off as folklore symbolism, something meant to add to the cabin's legend. That first night was quiet, the woods eerily still. Sam wandered outside, snapping photos of the cabin bathed in moonlight. But each photo felt off, capturing faint shadows just beyond the tree line that weren't visible to the naked eye. He thought his camera might be malfunctioning, so he ignored it and went to bed, hoping for better luck the next day. On the third night, Sam ventured deeper into the forest, hoping to catch the morning mist on film. The locals had described strange occurrences near the cabin, and he was determined to capture something supernatural. As he walked, the air grew colder, and he felt a growing sense of unease, as though something unseen was watching him from behind the trees. And then he heard it, a faint whisper. He couldn't make out the words, but the voice was clear, carried by the wind. He froze, scanning the darkness, but there was nothing, just the faint, haunting whisper repeating, almost beckoning him to come closer. "Come closer," the whisper seemed to urge, sending a chill down his spine. He decided to turn back, feeling the hairs on the back of his neck prickle. Yet, as he made his way to the cabin, the whisper followed, always just a few steps behind him. The next morning, Sam reviewed the photos he had taken in the woods. In nearly every shot, he could see a faint figure, a tall, shadowy silhouette lurking in the background, half hidden by trees. At first, he thought it was a trick of the light or his imagination. But with each passing night, the figure in his photos grew clearer, closer, until it was just steps behind him. On the 7th night, Sam was jolted awake by a loud thud. He grabbed his camera and went outside, finding strange footprints in the dirt around the cabin. The prints were enormous, clawed, and each step left a strange, dark residue on the ground. His heart pounded as he followed the trail, realizing it led to his bedroom window, the very spot he had been sleeping minutes before. As the days passed, Sam's nerves wore thin. The once quiet nights were now filled with distant whispers and shadows that crept ever closer to his cabin. By November 15th, he was desperate to leave, but a violent storm had rolled in, trapping him in the cabin. The whispering grew louder, sometimes sounding like it was just inches from his ear, even though no one was there. And the figure, that dark, towering presence, began to appear outside his windows, unmoving, always watching. It would stand there for hours, and whenever he mustered the courage to approach the window, it would vanish, only to reappear at the next one, as if taunting him. That night, Sam barricaded himself in the cabin, but the footsteps returned, pacing around the outside, scratching at the walls. He heard a voice, cold and relentless, whispering, "It's time. Come with me." On November 30th, the whispers became relentless, filling every corner of the cabin. Sam could barely sleep, each attempt interrupted by banging on the walls or strange guttural growls echoing through the darkness. Desperate, he decided to face whatever was haunting him. He grabbed his camera and stepped outside, shouting into the night, "Show yourself!" The forest fell silent, unnaturally so. And then he saw it, the visitor. A shadowy figure with impossibly long limbs, hollow eyes that glowed faintly, and a face shrouded in darkness. It pointed toward Sam, a bony finger stretched out in silent command. Paralyzed with fear, Sam took a step back, but the visitor moved forward, gliding soundlessly over the ground. Sam raised his camera, snapping photos in a blind frenzy, hoping somehow to capture proof of this nightmare. Each flash illuminated the visitor's face a little more, revealing a hollow, expressionless void, a face that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The last photo he took was mere inches from his face. The visitor had closed the distance, standing directly before him, reaching out with its clawed hand. The following morning, the storm cleared and the townspeople returned to the cabin to check on Sam, but he was nowhere to be found. His belongings were still there, his camera left on the ground outside the cabin. But Sam had vanished, just like those before him. When they developed the photos, the locals were horrified. Each image showed Sam, terrified, facing a shadowy figure that grew closer with each frame. The final photo captured the visitor's face, its hollow eyes staring straight into the camera, one clawed hand extended towards the lens. The townspeople knew what this meant. The visitor had claimed yet another soul. The cabin was abandoned once more, left to rot until the following November, when the whispers would begin again, and the visitor would return, waiting for the next unfortunate soul to wander into its grasp. The story of the November visitor spread quickly. People in nearby towns would tell it as a cautionary tale, warning travelers to avoid the woods during that fateful month. And every year, as the leaves began to fall and the nights grew colder, the locals would remember Sam, knowing the visitor still lingered, waiting and watching in the shadows of the November woods. The silent harvest of November. In the quiet, fog-drenched town of Ashmore, November brought a chill, not just from the dropping temperature, but from a centuries-old tradition that the townspeople refused to break. Every November 11th, at precisely 11:11 p.m., all the townspeople locked themselves indoors, shut their curtains, and doused their lights. For one night, no one dared leave their home. It was a tradition so deeply ingrained that no one questioned it. They just obeyed, for they knew it was the price for the town's continued peace. The legend was simple but terrifying. A spirit, known only as the Silent One, roamed the town every November 11th, and anyone caught outside would be taken, vanished into the cold, eternal night. Most dismissed it as folklore, but every so often someone went missing, and the townspeople would whisper that they had broken the unspoken rule. Kate Emerson, a journalist and skeptic, moved to Ashmore just before November, eager to escape the noise of the city. Her new neighbors politely informed her of the rules, but she couldn't help feeling it was all a strange, elaborate joke. By November 10th, Kate had grown tired of hearing the townspeople talk about the silent harvest, as they called it. Curious, she began asking questions around town, but most people would only shake their heads and say, "Stay inside, Kate, for your own good." One elderly woman, Mrs. Ackerman, went as far as grabbing Kate's hand, her grip surprisingly firm. "They won't find you," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "but you'll hear them calling your name, and once you do, it's too late." Kate brushed it off, determined to see this silent harvest for herself. That night, she set up her camera by her living room window, pointing it toward the empty street. She sat there, notebook in hand, ready to document what she was sure would be an uneventful evening. As the clock neared 11:11, she noticed something odd. The streetlights began flickering, casting the street in an eerie, strobe-like glow. And then, at exactly 11:11 p.m., they all went dark, plunging the town into absolute silence. Kate held her breath, the only sound in the room the faint hum of her camera recording. Outside, the fog had thickened, swirling through the street like ghostly fingers. She squinted, trying to make out shapes in the mist, when she heard it. A faint whisper, her name carried on the wind. "Kate." It was barely audible, but unmistakable. She glanced around, certain it was her imagination. But then it came again, louder, clearer, and from directly outside her window. "Kate!" Her heart pounded, but her curiosity kept her frozen in place. She leaned closer to the window, peering into the fog, straining to see who, or what, was calling her name. And then she saw it. A shadowy figure emerged from the mist, tall and thin, dressed in what looked like old, tattered clothing. Its face was hidden in the darkness, but its eyes glowed faintly, a sickly, pale yellow. The figure reached out a hand, long and bony, its fingers curling in a beckoning gesture. Kate felt a shiver run down her spine, but she couldn't look away. The figure continued to call her name, its voice growing softer, gentler, almost soothing. She knew she should turn off the camera, shut the curtains, hide like the rest of the town. But she stayed, mesmerized, as if in a trance. The figure took a step closer, its face coming into view. It was hollow, empty, as if someone had carved out the features, leaving only a void. And yet, she felt its eyes on her, heavy and piercing. It raised one hand, pointing to her door. The voice echoed in her mind, not through her ears, but as a whisper within her thoughts. "Open the door, Kate. I've come to offer you something precious, something only I can give." Her hand moved to the doorknob, her thoughts clouded with a strange longing, a desire to know, to see. But just as her fingers touched the handle, she heard a muffled scream from down the street. The sound snapped her back to reality, and she recoiled from the door, heart racing. The figure outside seemed to notice her hesitation. It tilted its head, almost disappointed, and then it turned away, gliding down the street, disappearing into the fog. But as it moved, other shadows appeared, each one stopping in front of a house, each calling out a name, each voice soft and inviting. The next day, the town was somber. Mrs. Ackerman's house, Kate learned, was empty. The elderly woman had vanished during the night, taken by the Silent One. When Kate tried to talk to people about what she'd seen, they refused to speak, brushing her off with fearful glances. It was as though acknowledging it would make them next. Kate returned to her home that evening, shaken but determined to uncover the truth. She reviewed her footage from the previous night, hoping to find answers. But her blood turned cold as she watched the video. In the footage, she saw herself sitting by the window, staring into the darkness. The figure outside was clear, calling her name. But as the video continued, the figure didn't just stay outside. It moved. At one point, the shadow seemed to split. A second figure appearing just behind her, its face looming inches from her shoulder, watching her, even though she hadn't seen it at the time. She paused the footage, chills running down her spine. In the reflection of the glass, she saw something else, her own face, but her eyes were blank, just like the creature outside. She couldn't remember feeling that way, but the footage was unmistakable. Determined to end this nightmare, Kate decided to confront the Silent One. She prepared herself for November 11th, 11:11 p.m., knowing that no one would help her. She set up candles around her home, placed a mirror near the door, and recited every protective chant she could find. When the time came, she stood by the door, waiting, heart pounding in her chest. The whispers started again, louder this time, not just calling her name, but speaking strange phrases, half in whispers, half in echoes that made no sense. Finally, the door rattled. She heard its voice, clearer than ever. "Come with me, Kate. I will show you the truth that no living soul has ever known." The voice was hypnotic, pulling her closer, her fingers trembling as she reached for the doorknob. But as she touched it, she looked in the mirror beside her and froze. Her reflection was wrong. Her face was twisted, hollow-eyed, just like the creature's. She pulled back in horror, snapping out of the trance. Realizing she couldn't resist the power of the Silent One on her own, Kate stumbled back, grasping for anything to break the spell. She heard its voice growing angrier, more insistent, as it continued to call her name. Desperate, she grabbed her camera and began taking pictures, hoping to capture whatever haunted her. Each flash illuminated the figure outside, showing it inching closer, reaching through the wall, its hand stretching impossibly into her space, nearly touching her. And then, with one final flash, the figure vanished. Kate collapsed, exhausted and shaking, the silence pressing down around her. She was safe, for now. But the whispers lingered in her mind, the knowledge that it had offered her something she had refused but still wanted. In the weeks that followed, Kate noticed strange changes. Her reflection in mirrors seemed delayed, her own face watching her with hollow eyes for just a second too long. She found herself waking up in strange places, with no memory of how she got there, her camera's photos showing her walking through empty streets at night, alone, always at 11:11 p.m. She realized that although she had survived, she was now a part of the Silent One's world, its touch leaving a mark on her, binding her to its haunting. November would come again, and she knew that next time there would be no escaping its call. Because in Ashmore, no one could resist the Silent One's harvest forever. Thank you for watching today's story. I hope these chilling experiences have made you reflect on fears and trust in life. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. Be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel so you don't miss out on more engaging stories and interesting content in the future. Thank you for your support, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.